Did you know that there's a lizard that can reproduce all on its own? The Mourning gecko lays eggs that hatch without any male involved. One individual can start an entire population. It sounds impossible, but it's exactly how this species work. So how do they do it? How can eggs develop without fertilization? And how did this system even evolve in the first place? That's exactly what we're exploring in this episode of The Science Behind. The Mourning gecko is a relatively small lizard, just about 8 to 10 centimeters long, tail included. It's delicate with subtle colors that can actually shift depending on light and temperature. At first glance, it might look like any other tiny tropical lizard, but this little gecko has a secret that makes it completely unique. Native to the Indo-Pacific, it originally lived across coastal Asia and scattered tropical islands. It favored warm, humid areas, climbing on trees, walls and foliage, and often hiding in crevices. In its natural habitat, it's nocturnal and mostly insectivorous, feeding on small invertebrates, pollen, and nectar. Over time, humans helped this species spread far beyond its original range. Plants, cargo shipments, and even decorative items allowed for a single gecko to hitch a ride across oceans. Today, mourning geckos are found in tropical regions across the world, from islands in the Pacific to parts of the Caribbean. And in many of these places, a single individual is enough to establish a population. Which brings us to the part that makes them so fascinating. Unlike almost all vertebrates, the mourning gecko reproduces without ever needing a male. A female lays viable eggs that hatch and grow into adults. One gecko can start a whole population. Entire populations are nearly all female, which essentially makes this a lesbian gecko. This reproductive strategy didn't just appear by accident. Genetic research shows that the species is the result of hybridization between two sexual species, one of which was likely close to Lepidodactylus moestus. The hybridization disrupted normal meiosis, the process that normally halves chromosomes for fertilization, but instead of failing completely, the genome actually found a way to work. Chromosome duplication before meiosis stabilized the eggs, creating the system we see today. This essentially means that newly generations of hatched mourning geckos are clones of their mother. Mourning geckos exist in multiple lineages. Some are diploid and some are triploid. Each lineage is largely clonal, producing near identical offspring. And interestingly enough, Parthenogenesis in this species didn't evolve just once. Genetic evidence suggests that it has arisen multiple times across separate populations, each time finding a way to bypass sexual reproduction entirely. So the mourning gecko isn't actually an ancient asexual relic. It is a recent hybrid that found a way to make what should have been a broken system work. So we've seen how the mourning gecko comes from a hybrid origin and how entire populations can be female. But what's happening inside the cells of the animal to actually make that possible? And this is where things will actually get really strange, because in most vertebrates, reproduction demands on meiosis. That's the process that halves the chromosomes in an egg or a sperm, so fertilization can restore the full genome. Without that, you'd expect problems, missing chromosomes, instability, or embryos that can't fully develop. But in mourning geckos, that step is completely bypassed. And here is how that works. Before meiosis even begins, the chromosomes in the egg actually replicate themselves. Then, instead of reducing down to a haploid set, the cell pairs each chromosome with an identical copy. The egg ends up retaining a full set of chromosomes, sometimes diploid or sometimes triploid. And that will be ready to develop without any fertilization. The result is that each egg is essentially preloaded with a complete genome. When it begins development, it grows into a healthy hatchlings without ever needing a sperm. And it's not a perfect cloning though, because there can still be small variations between offspring. Occasionally, sterile males can actually appear in some populations, hinting that the sexual machinery isn't entirely switched off. These anomalies are rare, but they show that even in a system built for asexual reproduction, remnants of a normal sexual pathway actually still remain. This system gives the mourning gecko some advantages. One individual can establish a population entirely on its own on a new island. Eggs can also hatch continuously, allowing for rapid colonization. Energy that would normally go into finding mates is instead invested in producing more eggs. However, there are also trade-offs, because without sexual reproduction, genetic diversity is low, and that can potentially make the species vulnerable to disease or environmental changes. Luckily, the hybrid origin gave them a high level of heterozygosity from the start, and triploidy helps buffer these harmful mutations. What's remarkable in all of this is the ability to reproduce alone. The genome duplication, the occasional male, is packed into a tiny, ordinary-looking lizard. And at the cellular level, it's an incredibly elegant workaround to a system that is normally so rigid and highly constrained. In other words, it isn't a quirk, it's a complete biological redesign hidden inside a very small gecko. So we've seen how the mourning gecko came to be and how it reproduces without any males. But what does that actually mean for the animals themselves? How does parthenogenesis shape its development, physiology, and everyday biology? Let's start with the eggs. Despite never being fertilized, the eggs develop just like any other geckos. They go through normal cleavage, gastrulation, and organ formation. Hatchlings emerge fully formed with all the same organs and features you'd expect in a sexual gecko. Parthenogenesis changes how they're made, but not what they become, essentially. These geckos lay eggs in pairs, usually hidden in crevices or under leaves. Clutch size is normally small but consistent, and females can actually lay multiple clutches in succession. Without the need to find a mate, energy that would normally go into courtship or mating is instead devoted to producing more eggs. That makes reproduction extremely efficient. The body itself is typical for a small gecko. It's a delicate frame, sticky pads for climbing, and the ability to drop and regrow the tail when threatened. Their metabolism is fast, and they also mature quickly, and they're nocturnal hunters of small insects and arthropods. Even their coloration is subtle but also functional. They can adjust their skin tones for camouflage or temperature regulation. Chromatophores, which is the pigment cells in their skin, allows for shifts in brightness and contrast depending on both the light, their background, or their mood. And while their genetics are largely clonal, that doesn't mean that they're essentially fragile. The hybrid origin gave them an initial boost in heterozygosity and polyploidy. And polyploidy helps protect against harmful mutations. It's a system that's essentially simple in appearance, but remarkably robust when you look under the hood. What's fascinating is how this combination of traits, parthenogenesis, rapid reproduction, small size, and flexible physiology has allowed for the mourning gecko to thrive in a variety of habitats around the world. Islands, coastal areas, even some urban environments, all comes from a species that looks at first glance completely ordinary. Parthenogenesis hasn't simplified the creatures in any way, it's just shifted the rules of how they functioned, allowing for a tiny lizard to carry out all the complex tasks of survival and also reproduction on its own. Looking back, the story of the mourning gecko is as surprising as it is elegant. It starts with its origins, a hybrid between two sexual species giving rise to a genome that could bypass the usual rules of reproduction. Then, inside its cells, parthenogenesis takes over, eggs developing without fertilization, full sets of chromosomes preserved, and the occasional sterile male hinting at the remnants of sexual machinery. And yet, this isn't just a genetic curiosity. The gecko itself thrives. It grows, it lays eggs efficiently, it climbs, hunts, and adapts, all while reproducing entirely on its own. Its physiology and development work seamlessly with a reproductive system that would normally seem impossible in most vertebrates. The mourning gecko shows us that nature can bend rules. One individual can start an entire population, whole lineages are essentially female, and yet the species remains stable, resilient, and also highly functional. So next time you think you understand how vertebrates reproduce, remember this little lizard. Evolution didn't just break the rules here, it rewrote them in a way that actually works. If you enjoyed exploring this remarkable species, hit like and subscribe. Drop your thoughts or questions about parthenogenesis or other unusual animal facts in the comments. It's always fun to dive into these puzzles. Thank you so much for watching.